Why did they laugh? The sound started softly like dry leaves brushing against each other, but soon it grew sharper, more deliberate like the slicing wind before a storm. In the waiting area of Fort Breenage's visitor center, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than words filled the air. It was young laughter, careless, uniformed, and untested. She sat alone. Her hands were folded in her lap, trembling just slightly, holding the hem of a jacket that looked older than anyone in that room. Olive drab, faded seams, a missing button at the collar. A single patch still clung to the left sleeve, half torn, its thread fraying like memory itself. They saw a relic. She saw a lifetime. The woman's name was Elise Rowan, nearly 70 now. Hair silver gray tucked neatly beneath a plain cap. Her boots, once black, had faded to a weary gray. She came here every Saturday, the 9:45 bus from a quiet suburb down near the river. Never late, never early, always alone. To the clerks and guards at the gate, she was routine. A quiet visitor who sat for an hour and left without a word. To the new recruits, she was a curiosity, an old woman with a soldier's posture, sitting like she belonged in a place that had long forgotten her. One of them, a kid barely 20, leaned to his friend. "Looks like she dug that jacket out of a dumpster." They chuckled. The sound was small but sharp. Elise didn't react. She had learned long ago that silence could defend better than anger. But silence also has a weight. It builds. It presses against the ribs until you forget how to breathe. And so she just sat, watching the light shift across the linoleum floor, catching on dust motes that danced like ghosts in the air. Her fingers traced the edge of that old patch, a falcon in mid-dive, talons gripping a bolt of lightning. Beneath it, 3 faint letters barely visible anymore: OSR. She used to run her thumb across those letters during long nights. It reminded her she was still here, that she'd survived. But not everyone recognized what those letters meant. And that was by design. Operation Silent Raptor was never meant to exist. Not on paper, not in records, not even in whispered bar talk among veterans. The kind of mission that vanishes into government shadows. The kind where names disappear and graves remain empty because acknowledgement is a liability. So when the young men laughed, Elise didn't feel anger, only distance. The kind that comes when you've lived too long with secrets no one believes anymore. One recruit, emboldened by his friend's smirks, pushed himself to his feet. His name tag read Denton, thin, sharp-eyed, trying too hard to matter. He strolled toward her, that cocky walk of a man still learning the world's cruelty. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice falsely polite. "This area's for personnel and their families only." She didn't respond, didn't even look up. He tried again, louder. "You hear me? This section's off limits unless you've got someone stationed here." A pause. The kind that stretches too long. Finally she turned her head slightly, her voice soft, not weak, but tired. "I've got someone here." He frowned. "Who?" "Myself." The laughter came again, this time louder. Some recruits covered their mouths, pretending it was just a cough or a joke shared among friends. But laughter like that always sounds the same: condescending, hollow, safe only in groups. Denton scoffed. "Right, sure thing, Grandma." And then a voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Some voices carry command without volume. "Where did you get that jacket?" Everyone turned. At the far end of the room, a man stood still, tall, gray-haired, the gleam of metals across his chest catching the sterile light. General Marcus Hale, a legend at Fort Breenage, decorated in 3 wars. The kind of soldier whose name carried weight even in silence. Now his expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on that old, faded patch. Denton straightened instantly. "General, sir, I was just—" Quiet. Hale's tone didn't rise. It simply ended conversation. He stepped forward. each stride heavy with something different, not anger, not confusion, but something colder, recognition. When he reached Elise, he stopped. His gaze didn't meet her face yet. It stayed on the patch. His hand trembled slightly as if the air around it carried ghosts. "That insignia," his voice lowered. "Where did you get that?" Elise raised her head slowly, eyes meeting his with a calm that unnerved everyone watching. "I earned it," she said. The general's breath caught. No one moved. Silence filled the room like a tide. "You were OSR," Hale whispered, as if afraid the letters themselves might draw unwanted attention. She nodded once, and that was all it took. The air shifted, something unseen, something ancient and sacred. The recruits, still half-smirking a minute ago, now looked confused. "What's OSR?" one whispered. The general didn't answer. He turned to them, face hardening. "Everyone out." "Sir, Denton started. "Out." The single word carried the weight of rank and history. They obeyed. In seconds, the waiting room emptied. The laughter that once filled it now lingered like smoke from a burned-out fire. When the door shut, the general exhaled. For a long moment, he just stared. "They told us you didn't make it out," he said softly, "that the entire unit was lost in '79. Elise's voice was quiet. "We weren't lost." She looked down at her jacket, her thumb brushing over the patch. "We were buried." The general sat beside her, slowly, not as a superior but as a man sitting before a ghost that shouldn't exist. "Operation Silent Raptor," he murmured, as if saying the name might summon memories he'd spent years trying to forget. "You were the only woman in the unit." Elise smiled faintly, a fragile smile that belonged to someone who had seen too much to fear anything anymore. "I made them promise to keep it that way," she said. For the first time, the general noticed the tremor in her hand, the way her fingers wouldn't quite hold still. The cost of survival, perhaps. He wanted to ask 100 questions. How? Why? What happened after the mission went dark? But something in her face told him not yet, not here, not like this. Still, her eyes, tired, lined with decades of silence, told him more than words ever could. Outside, the wind rustled the flag. The sound slipped through the door like an echo from another time. He looked at her jacket again. It was faded, torn, barely holding together. But the patch, even aged, seemed to glow faintly under the light. "You kept it all these years." "It's all I had left," she said simply. There was no bitterness in her tone, just truth. The general swallowed hard. Why didn't you ever come forward, tell someone?" Her gaze fell away, her voice turning into a whisper. "I did. No one listened. Eventually, I stopped trying." A long silence followed, the kind that carries grief, respect, and something wordless, guilt maybe. Then Hale did something no one in that building had ever seen him do. He stood at attention and saluted her. Not as a formality, not as a gesture of rank, but as debt. Elise blinked, startled. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, his voice steady now, anchored in something older than protocol. "You were a ghost in our files, but you're a giant in our history." She didn't reply, just looked at him, eyes shimmering faintly, not from pride, not from sadness, but from something simpler, recognition. For the first time in decades, someone remembered. But that was only the beginning. Because the following Saturday, when Elise returned, as she always did, she wouldn't be alone. Something had changed inside those walls. Something that would remind every recruit, every officer, every passerby that not all heroes wear medals. Some wear silence, and others just an old, faded jacket. Why did she keep coming back? That question haunted General Hale long after she left the waiting room that day. He couldn't shake the image, the frail woman with the steady eyes, the torn patch, the silence heavier than any salute. He'd seen combat zones, drone footage, classified files that could drain the soul out of a man, but that face stayed with him. That night, he sat in his office long after lights out, the glow from the desk lamp cutting across stacks of yellowed folders. He opened one labeled Declassified, 1979. His hand hesitated. Then he reached for another marked Operation Silent Raptor. Inside, almost nothing. A few blurred photos, a redacted memo, a mission order that began and ended mid-sentence. Most of the pages were black ink on blacker ink. Hale leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. Buried, she had said. He understood now. They hadn't just lost her, they'd erased her. The next morning, the base woke under a pale dawn. Training drills echoed across the grounds, boots thudding in rhythm, rifles clattering on metal racks. Young soldiers shouted cadence, their voices bright with inexperience. Denton was among them, the same recruit who'd mocked Elise days earlier, but something had shifted in him. The general's reaction, the silence that followed it, gnawed at him. He had replayed the moment 100 times. The way Hale froze, the way that old woman didn't flinch. Who was she? After drills, Denton sat in the mess hall, poking at his food until his friend sat across from him. Man, you're still thinking about her. She had that patch, Denton muttered. OSR, you ever heard of that unit? The other shrugged. Nah, maybe some old reserve thing. General Hale looked like he'd seen a ghost. Yeah, well, maybe he did. Denton didn't laugh. For the first time since he joined the military, a small, uncomfortable truth stirred in him, that the world didn't revolve around the present, that there were stories deeper than his rank or training. 3 days later, Hale requested her file from the National Archives. The response came back within hours. No existing record of Elise Rowan under Operation Silent Raptor. Subject deceased, presumed MIA, 1980. He stared at the word deceased. It was almost insulting. By 1800 hours, he was driving himself to the edge of town, a small row of houses near the river. He parked outside one with peeling paint and an overgrown garden. The smell of earth and jasmine lingered in the air. She was there, kneeling in the soil, gloved hands turning dirt around tiny green shoots. When she noticed him, she didn't look surprised. "General," she said simply, straightening up. "You knew I'd come," he replied. "You strike me as the kind of man who can't leave a story unfinished." He smiled faintly. "You could say that." He took off his cap, lowering his tone. "I checked the archives. They think you're dead." "I know," she said, brushing the dirt from her gloves. "Makes paying taxes easier." He chuckled softly, the first time she'd heard him laugh. Then the silence returned. He looked around her small yard. The garden was neat, disciplined, like a soldier's quarters disguised as life. "You live alone." "Always have." "After everything you did, you could have had a pension, recognition." "I didn't do it for that," she cut in. Her tone was calm, but sharp enough to end the thought. The general nodded, letting it settle. "Tell me about the mission," he said finally. She turned to the horizon, where the sun was falling behind the base walls in the distance. For a long time she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice came low, even and steady, like someone reading a confession to the wind. "We were 7, she began. 6 men, 1 woman, tasked with crossing into occupied territory, no insignia, no identification. We were to confirm intel about a weapons transfer that could have changed the course of the conflict." Her eyes drifted. He noticed the faint tremor in her jaw. "It was supposed to be a 3-day infiltration," she said. "It lasted 14 months. Hale froze. "You were captured." "Yes." "Why wasn't there an extraction?" She turned to him, and for the first time he saw a flash of old anger. "Because they couldn't risk exposing the mission. We weren't supposed to exist, remember? If we were caught, the country would deny us. And they did." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet soil. "I kept the intel," she said. "Hidden, protected, Even in that camp, when they traded me, I was half a person. The others didn't make it. Their names were erased before they were buried. Hale's voice softened. And when you came home, they called it classified, said I was unstable, trauma, memory inconsistencies. They told me to move on. She smiled bitterly. So I did, I just didn't move far. He studied her, the lines in her face etched with the cost of secrets. And you still came back to the base every week. To remember them, she said quietly. To remind myself they were real. The general exhaled slowly. You know, he said, you don't owe them silence anymore. She looked at him, eyes softening. Silence is all they left me. He didn't argue, because how do you tell someone like her that the system that buried her will suddenly care now? Back at the base, Hale sat in his quarters staring at a photo from 1978, a blurred group of soldiers, faces smudged by time. One woman stood among them, her expression half hidden by shadow. Elise. He picked up the phone. Get me the secretary's liaison, he said. I want everything still classified under OSR. There was hesitation on the other end. Sir, that's above clearance. Then raise the clearance, he interrupted. We've already buried too much. Elise's nights were longer now. The visit from the general had stirred ghosts she'd managed to keep asleep. That night she dreamt again, the smell of diesel, the ringing in her ears, the cold rain hitting metal. The faces of her team flickered like dying film reels. Mendez, Carter, Lee, all gone. She woke before dawn, sweat on her forehead, the garden visible through the open curtains, peaceful, alive, ignorant of war. She stood by the window, hand resting on the jacket draped over a chair. The patch caught a faint shimmer of moonlight. She touched it gently. I told you I'd keep it safe, she whispered. Some promises outlive the people who made them. 2 weeks later, a black SUV pulled up outside her home. The same general stepped out, this time without uniform, just a dark coat and weary eyes. I found it, he said as soon as she opened the door. Found what? Your report, the real one. It was sealed under an executive code from 1980. They buried it under nuclear protocol, top secret, non-recoverable. She smiled faintly. That sounds about right. He handed her a file, slim but real. She didn't open it, just stared at it for a while before setting it down. Why bring this to me now? She asked. Because they'll want to rewrite it, Hale said, before they decide to honor you posthumously. She looked up sharply. I'm not dead yet. I know, he said quietly. That's the problem. They sat for a while in silence. Outside, the world went on. Trucks rolled past. Children shouted down the block, life unaware of the storm brewing in two old soldiers' hearts. You want me to fight back? She asked finally. I want them to remember, he replied. The truth doesn't need to shout, Elise. It just needs to be seen. Her gaze softened. You sound like someone who's tired of medals. He chuckled. Maybe I am. The following Saturday, Elise didn't take the bus. She walked, the jacket on her shoulders, the patch visible. When she reached the base gates, the guards didn't stop her this time. They saluted. Word had spread, no one knew the full story, but everyone knew the general's reaction hadn't been for nothing. Inside, the recruits stood taller. Some looked away, ashamed. Denton especially. She passed them quietly. No anger, no pride, just stillness. General Hale met her at the lobby, an unspoken understanding in his eyes. You ready? For what? For being remembered. She smiled, that small, knowing smile that carried both forgiveness and warning. I never asked to be remembered, she said. I just wanted them not to be forgotten. And with that she walked into the building, slow, steady, unafraid. Behind her the recruits whispered again, but this time there was no laughter, only awe. Because now they knew that the old jacket wasn't a relic. It was history sewn into fabric, a story stitched with blood, silence, and sacrifice. And somewhere deep inside, Each of them felt the same quiet question echo. What will I leave behind when my uniform fades? What happens when the truth finally knocks and you're not sure you want to answer? For Elise Rowan, truth had always been a dangerous visitor. It never came alone. It carried memory, guilt, faces she'd buried. And now, thanks to General Hale, it was standing at her door again. The morning air was cool, a thin mist rolling over Fort Breenage's fields. Through her kitchen window, Elise watched the fog cling to the chain-link fence around the base. The garden outside gleamed with dew, her little sanctuary in a world built for war. The file the general had given her sat unopened on the table. Its edges were crisp, almost mocking. She poured herself coffee, hands steady now. You'd think after decades of silence, a few typed pages couldn't scare her. But she knew better. Paper could wound in ways bullets never could. The knock came just after 7. When she opened the door, Hale stood there, rain beating on his shoulders. Behind him, 2 men in plain suits waited beside a dark sedan. They didn't look local. "Morning, Elise," the general said softly. She glanced at the men. "You brought company." "They're from the Department of Defense. They want to talk." "About Silent Raptor." He hesitated. "About recognition." She almost smiled. "Recognition, that's what they call it now." He sighed. "Let me come in." She stepped aside. The men entered, polite but heavy with bureaucratic purpose. They removed their coats, introduced themselves as agents of historical review. That phrase alone made her stomach tighten. She'd seen it before during investigations, tribunals, debriefs that rewrote pain into policy. One of them opened a tablet. "Mrs. Rowan, our records indicate you were part of an off-the-book operation in '79. We're reevaluating classified missions for public transparency." "Reevaluating," she repeated, tasting the word. "You mean rewriting?" "Ma'am," the younger one said carefully, "we just want your cooperation." She studied him, fresh face, careful smile, eyes that hadn't seen a battlefield. "How old are you?" 31. "You were born 10 years after that operation ended," she said quietly. "What could you possibly evaluate?" The man flushed. Hale shifted, uncomfortable. "Elise," he said, "they want to honor you properly, give you your due." She turned to him, voice low. "Honor isn't something you give with permission slips." The agents exchanged glances. "Mrs. Rowan," the older one said, "if you refuse, the report stays sealed. No one will ever know what really happened." Her eyes darkened. They never wanted to know. The younger agent softened. "Please, just tell us what you can remember, off record if you prefer." That word "remember" cracked something inside her. She sat down, staring past them, seeing not the kitchen but a rain-soaked jungle lit by muzzle flashes. "I remember silence," she said. The room went still. Hale sat beside her, listening as she spoke, haltingly at first, then with a slow, unstoppable rhythm like floodgates giving way. She described the drop zone, a ruined road choked by fog, the sound of rotor blades fatting into nothing. The orders whispered through static. "We were told to intercept a convoy," she said. "High-value weapons transfer. If they crossed the border, the city would burn. We moved at night. No light, no radios, just signals and faith." She paused, hands gripping the edge of the table. "They never told us there were civilians with the convoy, families, kids. We didn't find out until," her voice faltered, "until it was too late." The younger agent typed quickly. The clack of keys felt obscene. "One of ours panicked. The call came to retreat, but command went dark. We were cut off. I made the decision to call the strike anyway to stop that shipment." She swallowed. "We hit them before dawn." Hale's breath hitched. "And the civilians?" She didn't look at him. "Collateral, that's what they called it later." The room was thick with unspoken things. Horror, disbelief, pity. "I radioed for extraction," she continued, voice cracking. "Instead, they told me to destroy all evidence. The mission couldn't exist. They said they'd send help. They never did. The older agent closed his tablet slowly. Mrs. Rowan, if this is accurate, the strike prevented a much larger catastrophe. You saved thousands. She looked up, eyes burning. I killed 20 who didn't need saving. No one spoke. After they left, Hale lingered. He wanted to say something, anything that might lighten the weight he saw pressing on her chest. But what words could? You did what you were ordered to, he said finally. No, she replied. I did what I thought was right. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. They'll spin it however they need. I know. Will you let them? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. Not this time. The next day, the base mess hall buzzed with rumor. Recruits whispered that the general had brought a ghost back to life. Denton listened quietly at the corner table. He'd done his research now. OSR wasn't in any official database, but fragments existed. One photograph, one mission log, one unexplained satellite strike. He couldn't stop thinking about her words, myself. That night he found himself standing outside the memorial wall, hundreds of names etched in black granite. His reflection shimmered among them. He ran his fingers across the cold surface and whispered, "What would I have done?" He didn't expect an answer, but maybe that was the point. Hale met with the base commander the next morning. The man was younger, sharp-jawed, career-minded. Sir, Hale began, I want authorization for a ceremony. Unofficial, internal recognition for Elise Rowan, Operation Silent Raptor. The commander frowned. That operation's classified, General, you know the risk. I know the cost of forgetting, Hale said quietly. The commander hesitated, then exhaled. Do it quietly. No media, no records, just respect. Hale nodded. Sometimes silence is the only language the military understands. That evening, he drove back to her house. She was on the porch, reading the file he'd given her days before. The last light of sunset painted her face in gold and scarlet. They're giving you a ceremony, he said. She looked up, eyes distant. For what? For surviving. For keeping faith. She smiled faintly. Faith in what? He didn't answer. She stood, slipping on her jacket, the same faded green, the same patch clinging by thread. If I come, I'll come as I am. No speeches, no medals. That's exactly how they'll remember you, he said. 2 days later, the hangar was quiet. Rows of recruits stood at attention, unsure why they were there. The air was heavy, reverent. Hale stood at the podium, no rank showing on his plain uniform. When Elise entered, conversation died. The sound of her boots against the concrete echoed like history returning to claim its space. She stopped beside Hale, her gaze sweeping the faces before her, young, unscarred, full of ideals she once carried. Hale spoke first. There are names that never make it to walls, missions that never reach the books, but their ghosts walk among us, wearing the same colors, carrying the same oaths. Today, we remember one of them. He stepped back. Elise faced the room. For a moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched until even the air seemed to wait. I was where you are once, she began softly. Young, certain, I thought duty meant obedience. I learned later it means conscience. She took a slow breath. I won't tell you my story. You wouldn't believe it anyway. But I'll tell you this, every order you follow has a cost. Make sure you know who pays it. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It simply was. Then she nodded once and walked away. No applause followed, no anthem. Just silence, deep, respectful, echoing. And in that silence, every recruit understood something they hadn't before, that the uniform isn't just pride, it's memory. That night, Hale found her sitting on a bench outside the hangar. You did more in 5 sentences than I've done in 40 years, he said quietly. She smiled. I didn't say it for them, I said it for me. He sat beside her. The wind carried the faint hum of drills in the distance. You think they'll forget again? They always do, she said. but maybe this time one of them won't. He looked at her, wondering how she managed to carry both sorrow and grace so lightly. You could still let them publish your report, he said. Set the record straight. She shook her head. Records lie cleaner than truth. Let them keep their pages. I have my patch. She touched the fabric on her sleeve. It was frayed beyond repair now, threadbare, but the falcon still soared, lightning still in its claws. Some things, she murmured, don't need restoration, they just need remembrance. The general nodded. Maybe that's enough. She looked out over the runway lights flickering like stars. Enough for me. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The past rested between them, not forgiven, not forgotten, just understood. How far does a secret travel once it's spoken aloud? For decades, Elise Rowan had lived like a shadow, her story confined to silence, her name erased by ink and bureaucracy. But after that quiet ceremony inside Fort Breenage's hangar, something began to stir. A whisper, faint at first, moving through hallways, mess tables, phone calls, late-night conversations. Whispers have a way of growing. It started with one photograph. A recruit named Denton, the same boy who once mocked her jacket, had taken a single picture from the back of the hangar that day. He hadn't meant to post it. It was instinct, reflex. An old woman standing beside a general, light spilling from the open hangar doors, the torn patch on her sleeve catching the sun. He wrote only one line beneath it. They said she didn't exist. Turns out she carried us all. By nightfall, the image had traveled farther than anyone intended. Through veteran forums, through a military subreddit, through private group chats that connected active-duty soldiers to retired ghosts. No name, no details, just that image and the patch. The falcon, the lightning, the letters OSR. Inside her small house, Elise didn't know any of it yet. She was sitting by the window, watching the rain come down in long silver lines, her teacup cooling beside her. The news hummed softly in the background, another briefing, another conflict. She barely listened anymore. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Few people called, but the voice on the other end was careful, young, uncertain. Mrs. Rowan. Yes. This is Private Denton, from the base. A pause. I wanted to say thank you for what you said. Elise smiled faintly. You don't owe me thanks. I think I do, he said. You made us think about what we're doing here, why we wear this. She could hear the sincerity in his voice. It was awkward, raw, the kind that can't be faked. Then maybe it wasn't wasted, she murmured. Ma'am, he added, hesitant, people are asking about the patch, about OSR. There's talk online. Did we cause trouble? Her silence was long enough to make him nervous. Finally she said, you can't cause trouble with truth, only with lies. He exhaled, relieved. I just wanted to make it right. You already did, son, she said softly. After the call ended, she sat for a long time, staring at the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. A single beam of light broke through the clouds, landing across her jacket draped over the chair. The patch shimmered faintly, as though remembering. By morning, her world had changed again. Hale was the first to see it. Sitting in his office, scrolling through his phone between meetings, he froze at the sight of the photo. Thousands of shares, dozens of comments from veterans who recognized the insignia but refused to speak of it publicly. Some claimed they'd served near OSR. Others called it a myth. And then, among them, a thread of anger, questions about why such a story had been hidden. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. So it begins, he whispered. The phone rang. It was the base commander. You seeing this? I am. You realize the department, not going to like this level of exposure. They already buried the truth once, Hale said quietly. Maybe it's time it dug itself out. There was a long pause on the line. You're playing with fire, General. Fire, not always the enemy, Hale replied and hung up. By noon, 2 government vehicles arrived at Elise's home. Same suits, different faces. "Mrs. Rowan," one said tightly, "we need to discuss the circulation of certain classified images." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean a picture of an old woman standing in sunlight?" "That picture is tied to a restricted emblem," the man said. "We'd prefer it be removed." She leaned back in her chair. "Then remove it." He hesitated. "We can't without your consent." "Then I don't consent." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You don't understand the implications." "Oh, I do," she said evenly. "You're worried people will start asking why a dead woman has a service patch nobody's supposed to recognize." The younger agent shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, if you're not careful, this could become political." "It already was," she said, her tone flat. "The day you buried us, it became political." Hale arrived halfway through their conversation. He stepped between them, voice like steel. "That's enough. She's done answering to ghosts." The older agent bristled. "Sir, with respect, this is beyond your jurisdiction." "With respect," Hale replied, "so is her life." The agents left. No threats, no arrests, just the promise of more to come. That night Hale drove her to the edge of town, away from streetlights and noise. They parked near the overlook, the place where the forest met the lights of the base below. From here, you could see the runways, the hangars, the silhouettes of soldiers moving like tiny figures in a play. "Why did you defend me?" Elise asked quietly. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Because you reminded me what it used to mean to serve." She studied him. "Used to." He smiled sadly. "Before the paperwork started winning." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of cicadas filling the air. She turned to him. "Do you regret it, the years, the orders?" He thought about that. "Some, but mostly I regret the things I never questioned." She nodded slowly. "That's where most ghosts come from." He looked at her jacket, the worn patch. "You ever think about replacing it?" "No," she said. "If I fixed it, it would stop being true." The words lingered, quiet but sharp. A week later, journalists began calling the base. Requests for comment, inquiries about the woman in the photo. None of them got answers, but curiosity only grew. Hashtags started. Silent Raptor. The Forgotten Unit. The woman with the patch. Hale tried to shield her, but the story had taken on a life of its own. The world loves a ghost story, especially one wearing a uniform. One morning, Elise opened her mailbox to find letters, handwritten, from soldiers she'd never met, from widows, nurses, medics, even a young girl who wrote, "My mom says you remind her of my grandpa. Thank you for being brave." She read every one, folded them neatly, tied them with string, and placed them in a shoebox beside the file marked Operation Silent Raptor. Later that night, she sat on her porch with Hale. The air smelled of pine and distance. "They're calling you a hero," he said. She shook her head. "Heroes are just stories people tell to make peace with their guilt." "Then what are you?" She smiled faintly. "A witness." At the Pentagon, someone wasn't smiling. Inside a windowless room, a conference call echoed between high-ranking officials. The words containment, optics, and national security filled the air. The decision was simple: control the narrative before it controlled them. By dawn, a statement was drafted, vague, polished, full of gratitude. It acknowledged the bravery of all who serve, especially those whose missions remain classified for the protection of our nation. No mention of OSR. No mention of Elise. When Hale read it, he laughed once bitterly. They managed to write a tribute that says nothing. Elise only shrugged. That's government poetry. But truth, once spoken, refuses to stay buried. A retired pilot came forward. Then a medic. Small fragments surfaced, documents once thought lost, testimonies written under pseudonyms. Piece by piece, a story emerged of a mission deep behind enemy lines, of soldiers who vanished so others could come home. One night Denton visited her again. He was off duty, dressed in civilian clothes, nervous. "They're saying people want to see you," he said. "They're talking about giving you a medal, publicly." She laughed softly. "After 46 years. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him kindly. "You think a medal would make me whole?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe it would make us better." She smiled at that. "Then let it make you better. I've already had my ceremony." He frowned. "When?" She looked toward the horizon. "When someone finally listened." Later, Hale sat with her on that same bench outside the hangar, the night thick with crickets and jet noise. "You know this isn't over," he said. "It never is," she replied. He hesitated. "What will you do if they come again, if they demand silence?" She looked at him, eyes calm. "Sure. Then I'll do what I did last time." "Which is?" "I'll survive it." He nodded slowly. The words carried more weight than defiance. They were promise and prophecy in one breath. For a long time they sat there, two soldiers made of different centuries, bound by one truth. History belongs not to the loudest, but to those who endure long enough to be remembered. When Hale dropped her home that night, she paused at the gate. "Marcus," she said softly. He turned. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not treating me like a ghost." He smiled. "You're no ghost, Elise. You're the echo that won't fade." She watched his car disappear into the dark. The hum of the tires faded, leaving only the rustle of her garden in the wind. She touched the patch on her sleeve once more, and for the first time in decades, she didn't feel alone. The falcon still dived, the lightning still struck, and somewhere out there the truth, fragile, stubborn, finally began to fly. What happens when a truth meant to heal begins to divide? For weeks, the photograph of Elise Rowan had circled the country like wildfire. News outlets couldn't agree if she was real or myth. Some called her a forgotten hero. Others whispered that she was a fabrication, an emotional story built to distract the public from other scandals. Everyone wanted a piece of her silence. But Elise never went on camera, never gave an interview, never chased the light. While the world argued, she stayed where she always had, tending her garden, walking to the bus stop, sitting quietly by the base's visitor window each Saturday morning. Some called it humility, others called it denial, but those who knew her or thought they did began to understand. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was choice. General Hale, on the other hand, had no such luxury. In Washington, his name now appeared on several sensitive communications lists. The Department of Defense wanted answers, not just about Elise, but about his decision to let her story breathe. He was called to a private review at the Pentagon, a sterile room filled with flags and questions that weren't really questions. A man in a gray suit opened the meeting. "General Hale, you facilitated contact with a civilian believed to be part of a redacted operation. Are you aware that Operation Silent Raptor remains classified at the highest level?" "I am." "Then you understand your actions may constitute breach of protocol." Hale's expression didn't change. If recognizing someone's service is a breach, maybe the protocol's broken. The room went still. Another official leaned forward. "You realize the chaos this photo has caused? Every journalist with a clearance sniffing around restricted archives." "I didn't release it," Hale said evenly. "A young recruit did, out of respect." The man scoffed. "Respect?" He broke operational confidentiality. Hale leaned forward. "He reminded us what it means to have one." That ended the discussion. For now. But as Hale left the room, he could feel it, the shift. The quiet tightening of invisible hands around a story too dangerous to control. Back at Fort Greenidge, the mood was tense. The base commander had been instructed to minimize disruptive influences. That meant no more ceremonies, no public references to OSR, no mention of Elise. The recruits got the message, though not all obeyed it. Private Denton still visited her, now in plain clothes, often bringing coffee or supplies. It had become a kind of ritual, his way of atoning. One morning he arrived to find her mending an old flag on her porch, needle in hand, jacket draped across her lap. "You're wasting your day off here," she teased lightly. "Not wasting," he said, "learning." She smiled. "From what? An old woman with a sewing kit." He hesitated. "From someone who didn't quit when everyone else did." Her needle paused mid-stitch. She looked up, eyes soft but serious. "You think not quitting is a virtue, son, but sometimes it's just survival dressed up to look noble." He frowned slightly. "You don't sound proud of it." "I'm proud of the ones who didn't make it," she said quietly. "They didn't get the chance to learn what guilt feels like." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine and rain. Denton sat beside her, not sure what to say. Sometimes silence was safer than answers. After a while she handed him the flag. "Here, fold it properly, not like those lazy arms at inspection." He smiled faintly and did as she said. For a brief moment, the generational gap between them disappeared, soldier to soldier, duty to duty. When he finished, she looked at him approvingly. "You remind me of one of my own." "One of your team." She nodded. Carter, youngest, always asking why, drove command crazy. He grinned. "Sounds familiar." Her smile faded, her eyes growing distant. He didn't come home. Neither spoke again for a while. At headquarters, Hale received a formal warning. Cease contact with civilian Elise Rowan pending review. The signature at the bottom came from an old acquaintance, someone who once owed him a favor. He ignored it. Instead, he drove to her house that evening. When she opened the door, she saw it in his face, the weight of something heavier than orders. "They're coming after you," he said simply. She didn't flinch. "Let them. I've been dead on paper for decades. What can they take now?" "They can smear you," he warned. "Turn your story into something ugly." She smiled faintly. "They already did back in '79. He shook his head. "It's different now. You're visible. The more they can't erase you, the harder they'll try to own you." She met his gaze, steady and calm. "Then they'll learn I don't belong to anyone." By the next week, the media storm had turned. A leaked memo surfaced, questioning her mental stability post-conflict, citing possible delusion tied to unresolved trauma. It was the same language they'd used to bury her half a lifetime ago. Reporters wanted statements. Some called her brave, others called her a fraud. Online, strangers dissected her photo like a crime scene, zooming in on her patch, on her wrinkles, on her silence. Hale visited that night, slamming a newspaper onto her table. "Rowan, hero or hoax?" Elise barely glanced at it. "They've run that headline before. Different war, same ink." He sighed. "It shouldn't have to be this way." She looked up. "Marcus, this was always the way. You just forgot." He sank into the chair across from her. "They're using you. They'll spin you until the story fits their politics." "Then let them spin," she said quietly. "I've lived long enough to know the world never stops turning, no matter who gets credit for the sunrise." He laughed softly despite himself. "You always talk like a poet when you should be angry." She smiled. "Anger fades, dignity doesn't." But not everyone saw it that way. Inside the base, Denton noticed how quickly things changed. The same recruits who once saluted her picture now whispered skepticism. A few called her a fraud behind closed doors, afraid to be associated with controversy. It cut deeper than he expected, not because he believed the rumors, but because he saw how easily truth bent when no one was watching. One night, he confronted his squad leader. "You ever read the classified casualty logs from '79? The man shrugged. "Not my clearance." "Exactly," Denton said. "So maybe stop talking like you know." The room went quiet. He walked out before anyone could reply. Meanwhile, Hale's quiet defiance didn't go unnoticed. A message arrived in his secure inbox, unsigned but unmistakable: stand down or retire. He read it twice, then deleted it. That night he met Elise at the Overlook again. The air was cold, the stars faint through the haze. "They want you to disappear again," he said. "Then they'll be disappointed," she replied softly. He looked at her, the calm in her voice, the quiet fire in her eyes. "You know, I used to think bravery meant charging into fire." She tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled. "Now I think it means sitting here, waiting for the world to remember you exist and not breaking in the meantime." She chuckled. "Then maybe we're both brave fools." "Maybe," he said, "but I'll take that over silence." A week later, a small miracle, or maybe just justice, began to unfold. An anonymous veteran leaked the full mission log of Operation Silent Raptor. It confirmed everything: the infiltration, the destroyed convoy, the lost unit. And Elise Rowan, the only survivor, presumed dead, erased to preserve plausible deniability. The leak spread faster than the photo ever had. Within days, public outrage surged. The department issued a new statement: acknowledgement under review. Hale called her immediately. "You're in the news again." She sighed. "Am I still alive this time?" He laughed, shaking his head. "More than ever." "I didn't want this, Marcus," she said softly. "All I ever wanted was for them to stop pretending the dead never existed." "Then maybe now," he said, "they finally will." That evening, Denton returned to her porch. He didn't speak for a while, just handed her something, a small frame. Inside was the photo he'd taken, now printed clean and bright. "I thought you should have the original," he said. She studied it quietly. "Why?" "Because it reminded me that not all uniforms look the same, and not all wars end." She looked up at him. The boy who had once mocked her, now standing taller, steadier, a trace of reverence in his eyes. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You changed the base, you know. People walk different now." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's enough." Later, as the sun sank and the light turned gold over her small garden, Elise sat alone on her porch, the frame resting in her lap. She could hear the faint hum of a jet far in the distance, the same sound that once meant war, now only memory. Her fingers brushed the edge of the photograph. In it, she saw two people, an old soldier and a young one, both standing at the edge of history, unaware they'd just started rewriting it. She whispered softly to the wind, "For the one still buried in silence, we remember." And the wind, gentle and patient, seemed to answer back, carrying the echo across fields, hangars, and generations that would one day say her name with quiet respect. When truth becomes inconvenient, power calls it a threat. And now that threat had a name: Elise Rowan. The woman they'd once erased was everywhere, on headlines, veteran forums, classroom discussions. Soldiers who'd never heard of Operation Silent Raptor were now quoting her words: "Duty means conscience." Her picture hung on dorm walls, tucked into lockers beside folded flags. But every spotlight burns, and every truth that rises invites a shadow. It started quietly, a memo leaked to the press, claiming new inconsistencies in her file. The language was technical, deliberate: memory instability, conflicting debrief accounts, missing verification signatures. The subtext was clear: discredit her. Rewrite her again. Hale read the memo in his office, jaw tightening with each paragraph. He knew this playbook, the same bureaucratic suffocation that had erased her the first time. It wasn't about truth. It was about containment. He threw the file across his desk. Papers fluttered like wounded birds. Outside, the flag whipped in the wind. Inside, his conscience screamed. That evening, Hale drove out to her home. He found her on the porch again, rocking slowly, the same jacket across her shoulders. She didn't look surprised to see him. "They're circling, aren't they?" she asked softly. He nodded. They're calling for an inquiry. Congressional oversight wants testimony. She smiled faintly. You mean they want me to explain why I didn't die quietly? He sat beside her. If you don't testify, they'll write their own version. And if I do, they'll use your words to make themselves look righteous. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the porch boards beneath their boots. Finally, she said, maybe I'll go, but not for them, for the ones who can't. Hale studied her, the stillness in her face, the steadiness in her hands. You're walking into fire. She smiled. I've done that before. News of her potential testimony spread fast. Reporters camped outside her street. Cameras flashed whenever she stepped out. Neighbors whispered. Denton stopped by every day now, sometimes just to bring groceries, sometimes to stand guard at her gate. You sure about this? He asked one morning. She nodded. When they bury you twice, you stop fearing the dirt. He didn't understand it completely, but he admired it. The hearing took place in Washington, an old building that smelled of dust and history, lined with portraits of men who'd never known silence like hers. The room was packed. Journalists, senators, cameras. Hale stood at the back, dressed in civilian clothes, hands clenched behind his back. When Elise entered, the noise died instantly. No uniform, no medals, just her faded jacket, the OSR patch visible against her sleeve, the falcon, the lightning, the letters that once meant nothing to anyone, now the symbol of everything the government wanted to forget. She took her seat. The chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Rowan, we appreciate your willingness to appear. We're here to clarify events surrounding Operation Silent Raptor and to ensure accuracy in historical record. She nodded once. Accuracy, she echoed. That's a good word, hard to find these days. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room. They began with questions, dates, coordinates, names. She answered calmly, her voice even, deliberate. When she spoke of her capture, the room fell silent. When she described the civilians caught in the strike, even the reporters lowered their cameras. Finally, one senator leaned forward. Mrs. Rowan, do you consider yourself a hero? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, she said, I consider myself accountable. The words hung in the air like a verdict. She continued softly. The men I served with, they're the heroes. They obeyed when I hesitated and they died when I survived. If I'm here, it's because silence protected the wrong people for too long. A murmur rippled across the room. The senator adjusted his glasses, suddenly unsure. Another asked, do you regret following orders? She met his gaze. I regret not questioning them sooner. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was honest, the kind of honesty that scares powerful people, because it costs nothing to say and everything to live with. Hale's eyes burned. He testified 100 times in his career, but he'd never seen truth land like that, quiet, steady, unstoppable. When it ended, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions, flashbulbs exploding like artillery. But she didn't answer. She just kept walking, her steps slow, deliberate, each one sounding like the closing of a chapter she'd never asked to write. Outside the building, the air was cold. The crowd pressed forward, some reaching to touch her hand, others shouting support, a few hurling doubts. Hale pushed through to her side, shielding her from the crush. You all right? He asked. She nodded, though her voice trembled. It feels heavier now, not the jacket, the memories. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You did what none of them could, you spoke. She looked up at him, eyes shining. I didn't speak for me. I spoke so maybe the next woman won't have to prove she existed. That night, Hale sat alone in his hotel room, watching the news. Every channel showed her face. One called her the ghost captain. Another said the forgotten operative speaks. But what struck him most wasn't the headlines. It was the footage of her walking out, head high, the patch gleaming like a wound that refused to close. He whispered to himself, you finally made them see. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You've gone too far. Pull back or they'll bury her again for good this time." He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he shut the phone off and poured himself a drink he didn't taste. Back home, Elise received letters again more than before. Some from soldiers, some from mothers, some from men who'd once been boys in the wars she'd outlived. One read, "You made me forgive myself." Another, "My daughter wants to join because of you. She says you showed her courage isn't loud." She kept them all, but one stood out: no return address, just a folded note that said, "We remember Carter too." She wept quietly for the first time in years. The following morning, a black SUV parked across the street. Same model as before, but this time it didn't move. Denton noticed it while bringing groceries. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "you expecting company?" She followed his gaze. The SUV's windows were tinted. She could see the faint glow of a dashboard light. "No," she said, "not today." He frowned. "You want me to report it?" She shook her head. "If it's them, reporting won't change anything." That night the vehicle was gone. But the message was clear. They hadn't forgiven her for being louder dead than she'd ever been alive. Meanwhile, the hearing transcript spread online, not the official one, but a recording leaked by someone in the audience. Her words went viral. Veterans shared them. Activists quoted them. Students printed them on posters. Duty means conscience. Silence protected the wrong people. Make sure you know who pays the cost. She had never meant to start a movement, but sometimes courage doesn't ask permission. Weeks passed. The noise slowly dimmed. Washington moved on. New headlines replaced hers. The world always forgets it's what the world does best. But at Fort Greenidge, something had changed permanently. The visitor center where she'd once sat was renovated. On the back wall, where notices and announcements used to hang, a framed photograph appeared. The same one Denton had taken, her silhouette under the light, the falcon patch catching the sun. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Elise Rowan. Operation Silent Raptor, 1979. Service without recognition. Remember the unseen." No ceremony, no crowd, just quiet. Hale stood there one evening after everyone else had gone. He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of the frame. "They can't erase you now," he whispered. That night he drove to her home again. The porch light glowed faintly. She was sitting outside, a blanket over her knees, looking up at the stars. "You saw it?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Yes, Denton told me." "What do you think?" She took a long breath. "I think maybe that's enough." He sat beside her, folding his hands. "You think peace ever comes?" "Peace doesn't come," she said. "You make it, one memory at a time." The wind picked up, rustling the trees. Somewhere far off, a helicopter moved through the night sky, its blades a fatting echo. She closed her eyes. "Funny, after all these years the sound doesn't scare me anymore." Hale looked at her, this woman who had survived erasure, ridicule, and silence, and felt a strange calm settle over him. "You know," he said softly, "some people fight for medals, some fight for truth, but you fought for memory." She smiled. "Memory's the only thing they can't classify." Later, when the night grew colder, she went inside. Hale lingered on the porch a while longer, watching her window light flicker. And for the first time in a long career, he felt something rare. Not victory, not pride, something simpler. Hope. How do you protect a truth when the world is built to forget? For Elise Rowan, time was no longer the enemy. Silence was. She had survived every form of it: official silence, personal silence, the kind that comes after gunfire fades and faces blur. But now silence was back in uniform, knocking quietly on her door in the form of bureaucracy and threat. And this time she wasn't running. General Marcus Hale's life had become smaller. Since the hearing, since the leak, since he'd stood beside a woman the system wanted buried, the calls had changed tone. At first respect, then suspicion, then distance. He'd been quietly reassigned to strategic review, which, in Pentagon language, meant retirement without ceremony. His badge still opened doors, but the rooms behind them were colder now. He didn't regret it. He only regretted not doing it sooner. Every day, he drove past the visitor center. He would park his car for a few minutes, watching through the glass as recruits walked by the new frame on the wall, Elise's photograph, the falcon patch catching the morning light. Most of them stopped, not long, just enough to look, to wonder, to think. That was enough for him. But Elise, she wasn't done yet. The first sign came in a brown envelope. No sender, no return address, just her name typed neatly across the front. Inside were copies, old service documents, once redacted, the names of her team, Operation Silent Raptor, the confirmation of every mission entry she'd spoken about in her testimony. Someone inside the system had risked everything to send it. At the bottom of one page, scribbled in blue ink, "Truth belongs to the living." She read that line again and again until it burned into her mind. Then she knew what she had to do. When Hale arrived at her house that afternoon, she was waiting for him, jacket on, bag packed, the old patch glinting in the sunlight. "You're going somewhere?" he asked. She smiled faintly, back to where it started. He frowned. "You're not serious." "I am. The site still there. Abandoned maybe, but real. I want to see it before I go." "Elise, that's across the border. It's dangerous." She met his eyes calmly. So was living. He sighed. "At least let me come." Her smile softened. "I was counting on it." 2 days later, they drove out before dawn. The highway stretched empty, silver under the rising light. Hale's hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual. Elise sat beside him, quiet, watching the landscape blur by, fields giving way to forest, then to barren hills where the ghosts of old wars still slept. For hours neither spoke. Finally she said, "You ever think about what we leave behind?" He glanced at her. "Every day. I used to think legacy was something others built for you. Now I think it's the thing you build for them." He nodded. "And what are you building now?" She smiled. "A grave that finally has names." They reached the border by dusk. The ruins of an old outpost lay just beyond the ridge, cracked walls, a rusted comm tower, fragments of memory trapped in dust. The air smelled of iron and smoke, even after 46 years. Elise stepped out of the jeep, the wind pulling gently at her jacket. The place hadn't changed much, only grown quieter. The silence here wasn't hostile, it was sacred. "This is where Carter fell," she said softly. "Mendez too. They never recovered them. They said it was too unstable." Hale walked beside her, careful where he stepped. "You think they're still here?" She nodded. "Somewhere waiting." She knelt, brushing away dirt until a small piece of metal caught the light, a fragment of a dog tag. She turned it over in her palm. The name was almost gone, but she didn't need to read it. "Carter," she whispered. For a long time she just stayed there, hand pressed to the earth. Then she stood and looked toward Hale. "We're not leaving empty-handed." That night they camped beside the old watchtower. The fire crackled quietly, painting both their faces in flickering orange. The stars above were sharp, endless, the same sky she'd stared at during those 14 months in captivity. "You ever wonder if it was worth it?" Hale asked quietly. She smiled, eyes on the flames. "All of it is worth something. The question is, who collects the debt?" He nodded slowly. "You think anyone will believe the truth now that it's out?" "They already do," she said. "They just don't realize it's faith, not proof, that keeps history alive." He studied her, the lines, the scars, the strange peace that had replaced her anger. "You're not afraid, are you?" Of dying, she shook her head. That's the one order I won't disobey. It comes when it comes. They returned home 3 days later with the dog tag, some photos, and a small tin box of soil she'd taken from the site. She placed it beside her medals, the few she'd kept hidden. Then she wrote a letter. Not to the Pentagon, not to the public. To the families of her team. Each line was simple, handwritten, unflinching. She told them their sons were brave, that their sacrifice mattered, that she'd carried their names through every year of silence. When she was done, she sealed the letters and handed them to Hale. In case I don't get to deliver them myself. He frowned. Don't talk like that. She smiled gently. Marcus, you've seen enough soldiers to know when a mission's almost over. He didn't argue, couldn't. In the following weeks, her health began to wane. The years she'd carried quietly now showed, her breath shorter, her steps slower, but her eyes just as sharp. One morning, she didn't show up at the bus stop. The guards noticed first. By noon, Hale was at her door. She was inside, sitting by the window, sunlight falling across her jacket like a blessing. I'm not going to the base today, she said. He nodded, sensing what she meant. Instead, she reached for something on the table, a small envelope. I want you to do something for me. Anything. When I'm gone, she said, don't let them make me a symbol. I don't want parades or speeches. I want them to remember the others. Carter, Lee, Mendez, the ones who stayed quiet because I lived loud. He swallowed hard. You have my word. She smiled. Good, then I can rest. That evening, Denton arrived with flowers. He found her asleep in the chair, the jacket folded neatly over her lap, one hand resting on the patch, peaceful, still. He didn't wake her, he couldn't. When Hale arrived minutes later, the room was silent, the kind of silence that feels holy, not empty. He knelt beside her, eyes wet, voice breaking. You made them see, Elise, you did it. On the table beside her sat a note, short, written in her familiar, steady hand. Some heroes wear medals, some wear silence, some just wear time until the world is ready to listen. He folded it carefully, tucked it into his pocket, and stood at attention. Then he saluted her one final time. A week later, the base held a private memorial. No speeches, no press, just soldiers, recruits, and a flag folded neatly on a wooden table. Hale spoke only once. She didn't want recognition, she wanted remembrance, so that's what we'll give her. They placed her patch beneath glass beside the photo on the wall. The falcon gleamed softly under the light. Beneath it, a new line was added. In memory of those who serve unseen. Denton stood in front of it long after everyone else left. He touched the glass and whispered, "We won't forget." Then he turned, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, carrying a piece of her silence forward into his own future. Later that night, Hale returned to her house one last time. The garden had begun to bloom again, lilies, small and white, pushing through the soil she'd tended so carefully. He looked around the porch, at the chair where she'd sat, at the worn jacket now folded on the railing. A soft breeze moved through, lifting the edge of the fabric like a wave goodbye. He smiled sadly. Rest easy, Elise, they finally heard you. As he turned to leave, he noticed the small tin box near the door, the one with the soil from the old site. He picked it up, opened it, and found something she'd hidden inside. A slip of paper, her handwriting delicate but firm. When they forget again, remind them that honor doesn't vanish. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig it back up. He closed the lid, held it to his chest, and whispered to the empty air, "Yes, ma'am." The wind rustled softly through the lilies, almost like an answer. That night, under a sky full of quiet stars, the world didn't change, but one truth did. Her silence had ended. Her memory would not. And somewhere in the hush between heartbeat and history, a falcon flew again, unseen, unrecorded but free. How do you honor someone who asked not to be honored? For General Marcus Hale, That question had haunted every sunrise since Elise Rowan's passing. It followed him through quiet halls and sleepless nights, through the echo of her words that refused to fade. Don't let them make me a symbol. But he also remembered what came after. Remember the others. 2 months after her memorial, Fort Greenwich felt different. The recruits still ran drills, the jets still screamed across the sky, but beneath the daily rhythm there was something quieter, a kind of awareness that hadn't existed before. Every Saturday morning, a few soldiers would stop at the visitor center wall. Some saluted, some prayed, some just stood there, staring at the photo of a woman they'd never met but somehow knew. The caption beneath her name had become a creed whispered among the newer ranks. Remember the unseen. No one ordered it, no one enforced it, it just lived. That was her final victory, silent, stubborn, complete. Hale's own orders had changed. He'd finally signed his retirement papers. No press, no send-off, just a man leaving the job that had become his skin. But before he turned in his badge, there was something he needed to do. He drove south, past the gates, past the edges of the city, past the noise. In the passenger seat sat a wooden box wrapped in a faded military cloth. Inside it, the soil Elise had collected from the mission site, the fragment of Carter's tag, and a folded letter addressed to the ones who never came home. The drive took 6 hours. He didn't rush it. Some journeys aren't meant to be hurried. By dusk, he reached the ridge. The place was almost unrecognizable now, overgrown grass, wind twisting through rusted metal. The tower collapsed into the earth. The ghosts of silent Raptor slept beneath weeds in silence. He parked, stepped out, and stood in the same spot where Elise had knelt weeks before. The evening light spread across the horizon, soft, golden, merciful. He took a slow breath. You kept your promise, Elise. Now it's my turn. He opened the box and knelt. Gently, he poured the soil into the earth, mixing it with the dirt that had once held her comrades. The wind carried the dust upward, glowing in the fatting sun like ashes made of light. Then he set Carter's fragment on top, a single piece of metal, small but immortal. And beside it, the note she'd written for them all. You were not forgotten. You were just waiting for someone to find you again. He stayed there until the light dimmed, until the cold settled in his bones. He didn't speak again. Some moments are too sacred for words. When he finally stood, his knees ached. His eyes burned, but his chest felt lighter than it had in years. On the way back, he stopped by a small diner off the old highway, the kind where the waitress still called you honey, and the walls were lined with newspaper clippings from forgotten decades. He sat alone, coffee cooling beside him, replaying her voice in his mind. Her words at the hearing. Her laugh on the porch. The way she said, if I fixed it, it would stop being true. He looked down at the patch she'd left for him, the second one, hidden in the pocket of her jacket when he'd gathered her things. The edges were frayed, the falcon barely visible, but it was still there, still diving, still holding lightning. He placed it on the table beside his cup, staring at it for a long time. A young man at the counter noticed. Sir, he said hesitantly, that's the patch from that story online, isn't it? The silent Raptor one. Hale looked up, a small smile touching his face. Yes, it is. Was she real? The kid asked. Hale nodded slowly. More real than any of us. The boy grinned, respectful but curious. What was she like? Hale took a breath, looking back at the patch. She was quiet, but when she spoke, the whole room listened, and she carried the weight of 100 lives without ever asking for applause. He slid a few bills under his cup and stood. If you remember her, he said to the boy, don't remember the story. Remember the silence that made it possible. Then he left. That night he drove home under an ocean of stars. The radio stayed off. He liked the quiet. It reminded him of the way Elise used to pause between words, letting silence speak where sentences couldn't. He pulled into his driveway past midnight. On his porch sat a small package, no label, just a tag that read "From the Archives." Inside was a letter on official stationery. No sender, no signature, just 4 words written in careful pen. Declassification approved. Operation Silent Raptor. Hale exhaled slowly, then he smiled. It wouldn't undo what had been done. It wouldn't bring anyone back. But it meant one thing: the story would live. Not in rumor, not in whispers, in record, in history. He lifted his gaze toward the night sky and whispered, "You did it, Elise." A few months later, at a quiet museum in Washington, an exhibit opened. Small, modest, easy to miss unless you knew where to look. A single glass case. Inside it, a faded green jacket, a patch half torn, and beneath it, a plaque that read, "Operation Silent Raptor, 1979. Unit classified, mission redacted. Members unrecorded until now. In honor of Captain Elise Rowan and the 7 who never returned. Service without recognition, courage without applause." People passed by. Some stopped, curious. Some read the description. A few walked away in silence, the kind that meant something had reached them, even if they couldn't name what. And that was enough. Meanwhile, life went on at Fort Breenage. Private Denton had earned his promotion. He wore it quietly like a debt. On his desk, a single photograph: Elise and Hale standing in the hangar, the light spilling through the doors. The caption he'd written himself. "She showed us what duty sounds like when it whispers." Every new recruit who joined his unit learned her story. Not the version on the internet, not the press-ready legend. The real one, the woman with the old jacket, sitting alone in a waiting room while the world forgot her name. He'd end each telling the same way. "She didn't fight for glory. She fought so that when someone like you puts this uniform on, it means something." As for Hale, he never went back to Washington. He spent his days traveling, visiting quiet memorials, forgotten fields, places where the grass had grown over the past. Sometimes he'd find a name scratched into stone. Sometimes not. But he always left something behind: a folded note, a flower, a patch. Each one carried the same message. "We remember." He never signed them. He didn't need to. The people who'd understand already did. One evening, years later, he returned to Fort Breenage. The base had changed: newer buildings, younger faces, but the visitor center wall was still there. The photograph still hung in the same spot. The light still touched it at 9:45 a.m., just like it used to touch her shoulder when she waited in that room. He stood there for a long time, hands behind his back, eyes tracing the faint outline of her smile. "You were right," he whispered. "They forget. But then someone remembers again. And maybe that's all history ever really is: a cycle of forgetting and remembering, carried by the stubborn few who refuse to stay quiet." He turned to leave, but before stepping out, he looked back one last time. In the reflection of the glass, he could almost see her sitting in the chair. The same calm, the same poise, the same quiet dignity. He smiled. "Rest easy, Captain. Mission complete." Outside, the wind moved through the flags, soft and rhythmic. Somewhere in the distance, a group of recruits shouted cadence, young voices, full of pride, unaware they were echoing a legacy older than themselves. The general listened, the sound fading behind him as he walked toward his car. The horizon was gold with morning. He paused once, lifting his face to the sun. Then softly, almost to himself, he said the words that had become her legacy, her silent creed. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And as the light rose over Fort Breenage, a single glint caught the corner of the visitor center window, the faint reflection of a falcon diving through gold. It wasn't there the next moment. But for the few who saw it, it was enough. Because in that shimmer of light, they felt it. The weight of honor. The echo of silence. The flight of a memory that would never fall again.